Also today, Australians remain unconvinced that Labor's first budget since the election will reduce inflation. According to a post-budget news poll, 33% of respondents think the budget will be good for the economy, while 28% think it will be bad. 39% of voters believe the budget will make inflation worse. Just 13% said it would improve inflation in Australia. It seems the government's standing has also slid slightly since the budget. Now the sell job today was all about Middle Australia.
The budget is all about cost of living relief in Middle Australia. Support Middle Australia. Support for Middle Australia was absolutely central to support people in Middle Australia. Substantial help for Middle Australia.
It was aimed squarely at Middle Australia. Nothing says Middle Australia like making it cheaper to see a doctor. Middle Australia, Middle Australia, Middle Australia, Middle Australia.
Well, the Australian's chief political correspondent, Geoff Chambers, joins me now to discuss this live from Canberra. Geoff, this is a very clear change in message to Middle Australia. This was the one point that the opposition was attacking the government on, that it hadn't delivered for the average family.
Yeah, Sharri, it was a very lukewarm response to last week's budget from voters. As you've read out in those news poll numbers, more people think that the budget will make inflation worse than not. And in terms of will they be worse off financially, more people said that they would than not. So you've seen today both Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers on the big sell, and they'll be doing this all week. I think Jim Chalmers has several speeches to deliver, but I think Peter Dutton really got the jump on them last Thursday night. He made his speech squarely focused on Middle Australia, and you'd argue that the budget didn't explain clearly what its purpose was. People, I think, in a lot of the focus groups that were held subsequent to Tuesday night, they said, well, it's okay, the budget's fine, there's temporary measures there, but what is the real reform moving ahead? So I think it will be a really big sell for both Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese, and I think both will have their fingers crossed that in the next few meetings when the RBA board meets that that cash rate doesn't increase, and also hoping that those very optimistic Treasury forecasts on unemployment, wages and most importantly inflation actually stack up.
Well, and that's the problem for the government, that because inflation and this question of whether or not the budget did make Australia's inflation problem worse, that means that when the RBA does invariably lift rates again, there is room here for the opposition to try blame the government for that. Now, Geoff, you've also written today that Bill Shorten's attempt to retrofit a 5-point plan explaining how the government will save $15 billion on the NDIS. You say that this puts the integrity of the budget at risk. Why is this?
So when you look at the budget repair strategy, it's very much underpinned by assumed savings in the NDIS, not only across the forwards but across the decade. And across the decade, the government, with these very bold assumptions, suggests that they can make something like $74.3 billion in savings. Now, this is a scheme that year on year has blown out by billions. We've got a 5-point plan. We've got the government spending around $700 million to make savings, but there's no real commitment whatsoever to look at the eligibility of the scheme, and that would require a cooperation with the states and territories, and it would require legislation. And there's big question marks over the lack of detail in the budget and whether Treasury actually believes these numbers from the NDIA.
All right, well, also today making news, the reaction from the government to Peter Dutton's suggestion of allowing job seekers to work for 5 to 10 hours a week on top of their job seeker payments. Let's have a look at how the relevant Minister Amanda Rishworth seemed to rule this out, but Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, seemed to leave it open. That grab will come in a moment. But look, these conflicting reactions played out today. Do you think, Geoff, that this is an idea the government may adopt, or it was just a messy reaction?
I think that this is a similar tactic to what Anthony Albanese would do in his budget reply speeches, which is to get ahead of a government and to raise an idea that they are looking at. And we've got the employment white paper process, and we expect to see that middle of the year, and separate reforms looking at Job Active and these other work, get incentives for people on JobSeeker to get into work that Tony Burke and Amanda Rishworth are looking at. So I think that the government has to look at it. It's an obvious tool that could be used, and I think that Jim Chalmers' response tells you everything in relation to the fact that he is keeping that open as an option.
His options open. Well, we've got his comments now, so let's have a look.
We're putting substantial effort into getting more people into work before Peter Dutton started scratching around for something to say in budget week.
We don't want to see people staying on the safety net. We want to see people move into employment. Keeping them on JobSeeker is unlikely to be the answer.
All right, Geoff. Well, big news also, the Trade Minister Don Farrell has returned to Australia without a major breakthrough in the trade dispute with China, but he says this is a pathway forward to removing sanctions. Look, talks with our Chinese counterparts are continuing. Do you think enough progress is being made here? Do we have any time frame for when these tariffs will actually be lifted?
Look, I don't think there was any expectation from Don Farrell or the government that announcements would be made around easing these sanctions on this trip. This is that people-to-people contact that China likes. The assumption is what we're being told is that we're expecting in the next few weeks or over the next month that some of those trade restrictions will start to be eased. And when that happens, you'd expect that Anthony Albanese may well make that trip over to Beijing later this year. But there's still a lot to play out. And I think the key lesson here for our exporters is that you've got to really diversify your markets. And if you've already done that, you need to maintain that because at any point these sanctions may well return.
Absolutely. Whenever there's more foreign interference legislation or any other legislation to protect our sovereignty, you never know when they could be kicked into force or even worse. Geoff, major oil and gas producers are appearing to support Middle Australia. They're appealing to them to support the transition to renewable energy. They want Labor to abandon aggressive gas price caps beyond 2025. The Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association is also launching an advertising campaign touting the benefits of gas. What's Labor's reaction to this at this point in time?
So I think Madeleine King, the Resources Minister, is due to speak at the APIA conference tomorrow, and I suspect there that she'll be saying positive things to the gas companies and running the government line that they support gas as the key transition fuel towards renewables. But at the same time, we have this code of conduct which the government will be imposing on the gas companies, and that includes a baking in of the gas price cap over the next several years and potentially beyond. So the gas companies are arguing the point that LNG super profits and those record high prices that we've seen over the last couple of years, that when they come off, this will be a concern for them, potentially spooking investment and putting at risk the government's goal of trying to unlock more gas supply and avoid blackouts. On the other hand, you've also got the government in the budget last week throwing money at electrification. So there is a fair bit of contradiction going on, and I think that the gas companies are very concerned that when those prices come off, and if that cap is still in place, that will potentially see investment dry up in the country.